Good day, everybody, and thanks for joining us. This is a topic, to say the least, that it's exploded over the last year. It's everywhere, right? AI is everywhere. So we're going to give you a sneak peek today and talk about a lot of exciting topics around AI. I'm super excited to be hosting along with three awesome speakers. Once again, I am outnumbered by attorneys on this webinar, so hopefully I can keep up with them. Our discussion today is going to be giving you points and things that you can think about for your company or organization. We want you to be able to lead, right, in responsible AI, and that's what we all want to be able to do. We want to be able to lead the way with excellence, enhance your visibility into what's going on across your data, your ecosystem with AI, help you bridge compliance gaps and all sorts of topics. So I'm pretty excited to be hosting today. So we're going to have an open discussion here on all these topics. First off, talking about what is AI, what does it look like, what is governance, why does governance matter? And then we're going to talk a little bit about new products that we have coming, and also we have time for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, just definitely type them in as we go here, and I'll collect as many as I can, and we'll answer as many on the fly as we can. Okay. So first off, Beatrice, to you, thinking about today's discussion and why we're here, why do you think, well, first off, let's just start at the big frame at the top. What is artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so I think the definition of AI is something that everybody struggles with a little bit. It's not such a clear-cut definition, but that's kind of, to me, that's everything in technology. The underlying commonality between a lot of these definitions is that they evolve over time. So our understanding of what artificial intelligence is changes over time at a very high level, in a very general way. It's a type of technology, it's a branch of computer science. It's a type of technology that's designed to essentially enable computer systems to simulate human intelligence and completion of human tasks. Like I said, that what that actually means has changed over time. And one of the main reasons is that technology's advancement is exponential. So where we are in technology today is exponential, as evolved exponentially faster than it did for over 1,000 years, just in the last like 40 or 50 years, right? So our concept of technology changes, our perception of what is artificial intelligence changes with it, because our understanding of what computers can do changes with technology. So 25 years ago, 30 years ago, a GPS system. I mean, I remember when I got my first TomTom, I was like, oh my God, this thing knows where I am and it's telling me where to go. Like, I still remember when I first got my driver's license, my dad would like explain to me how to go places with like a paper map. That kind of dates me. But he'd be like, so you turn here and you go there, and you would have to plan ahead of time to like do things. And then we got into, the era of printing out directions with, I don't know what it was called in America, but like
MapQuest.
yeah, like where I'm from in Italy, we called it Go Map. So you would print it out and kind of follow it. And then suddenly we had TomToms, and it was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And at the time, that was kind of an artificial intelligence, because it was able to say, okay, well, you're looking to go to this address. This is the time you got to leave to get there at this hour. This is what the traffic looks like, etc. You know what? There's an accident on this road. Why don't you take this other road? Here's an alternative. Like, that was AI. Nowadays, like, smartphones can do everything. Like I assume they'll learn how to make coffee soon, which really to me is the key. But that kind of influences how we perceive AI, right? Like what was AI 6 months ago is if then function today almost. So that's kind of the interesting and also the challenging thing about AI. It just constantly changes.
Yeah, it's definitely moving fast. Definitely moving fast. I want to jump in here so we can do our first poll question. Let's go ahead and put that up. So how is your company deploying AI? Hopefully you're joining us today because you've already been thinking about this. Give us your thoughts about where you're at. How are you deploying in your products, in your services, in your operations? it could be all three. A lot of companies.
Well, while we're waiting for the poll, I think something that you said, Beatrice, about the speed and velocity of AI is totally right. I mean, the running joke like 5 or 10 years ago was that like adding the word AI to your value, to your company name increased your valuation. And that was way before this sort of current, ilk of AI, right? Which is really the advent of ChatGPT and generative AI and these large language models. And even looking at kind of what we were doing when ChatGPT came out a year and a half ago, or whenever it was in 2022, to Sora. I don't know if everybody's seen Sora, but it's the newest OpenAI, prototype that creates live, 60-second videos. For now, it's 60 seconds. You could literally type in, going through a snowy, mountainscape in Japan, and it'll create videos. The implications of that are amazing, right? It really has drastically changed even since we started talking about it. And the questions you ask, and the fact that 2 years ago you could say, when is Avatar playing? And it would break. And now you can ask it things like, what about those new EDPB guidelines? You can go to Gemini and ask about, ask it about recent CCPA guidance. It continues to kind of change, and how we use it continues to really drastically shift. It's really cool.
Hey, everybody. So poll results on screen. Not a big surprise here, but number one answer is in your operations, right? And so many companies are thinking about that now, right? Where can they plug in AI to make you more efficient? I think about it every day. Where can I use AI to make me more efficient, right? All those kinds of questions in services and in products that we're producing. So pretty much everywhere is what this tells me, but operations definitely would be at the top of the list, working on making us more efficient. Val, what do you think about just from a standpoint of how AI, we can go ahead and let's close the poll. And then from the standpoint of, let's go ahead, we can move to our next slide just for discussion too. Yeah, and then how do you think AI most impacts organizations, right? There's a few things that come to top of mind, but just from what you're seeing, being a general counsel and chief privacy officer, what are you seeing and hearing?
I'm going to date myself a little bit here. Let's go back into the Wayback Machine about a year and a half, 2 years ago, right? I think most organizations, including my former employer, and probably, for places like where Beatrice is years prior, I think a lot of people became really excited about what this sort of new generation of AI can do, because you were seeing these sort of provocative news articles about how people could code 70% faster or produce something quicker or whatever. And so a lot of organizations, I think, while everybody's been geeking out about AI, and you were hearing about, our students using this instead of Wikipedia to plagiarize or whatever, a lot of organizations were hearing about sort of preliminary use cases, GitHub Copilot studies about productivity and efficiency. And executive teams and boardrooms were really like, their interest was piqued. They were like, is this something we can do to move faster, to innovate quicker, to be ahead of our competition, to reduce costs, whatever? And so I think that's how a lot of this, in my opinion, that's how a lot of this really took off in our professional lives. Maybe not if you are in academia and you're worried about students, et cetera, but for a lot of us, especially those in like SaaS and tech, I think it took off when the conversation came from kind of the top down about, how does this help us to move quicker, faster, smarter, et cetera? How can we do more with less? How can we have the rainmakers focusing on complicated issues, et cetera? And I think that sort of transcended into, what can we do to make our products and features more attractive, more interesting, better for our users? And I think that's sort of slowly morphed, at least in my experience. And I'd love to hear, Beatrice, what you've seen, and Beth and Noel, but that slowly morphed into this conversation of, hey, are there implications? And then you're starting to see articles about, lawsuits for IP and M&A counsel worrying about what it means, at firms and stuff like that. And I think that's when legal really got tapped on the shoulder. A lot of us were having sort of interesting coffee talk about what are the privacy implications. But I think all of a sudden that all came to a head when you're saying, executive team, board members, et cetera, who are asking, the company to look at how to use AI to move quicker, are now saying, okay, well, what about the risk? We need to manage the risk. right? And the risk is complicated. It's not just privacy. Privacy is part of it, but it's personal data, it's intellectual property. There's just such a, sort of a cross section of areas that AI can hit, because what you're putting into it, what it's giving you out, how it's training the models, is all stuff it's still kind of being understood, and it's a bit of a black box.
For sure. And what's funny is I was just thinking as you were talking about that, and once again, Taylor Swift is in the mix, right? With thinking about the data and the ethical AI and what has been happening with manipulating her image. And that's already, I mean, we're hearing about that quite a bit into the new year already. Beatrice, what about you from your perspective? How do you think it most impacts organizations?
I think I think it's really interesting how, for some organizations, this is a completely novel conversation. And for some organizations, it's been a conversation for a long time. The thing that I witnessed the most, through colleagues and network with organizations that are maybe in business, industries or markets that are a little more traditional, retail, things that you wouldn't necessarily immediately think, oh, they use AI. I think what they discovered once the buzz got really powerful is that they were using AI. And they just hadn't thought it through, or it just never made its way to either a legal, ethics, or compliance department because it was just not part of the conversation. I think, I tend to always have kind of like a maybe a less popular take on AI in organizations, which is, I think the last like 6 to 9 months, year, everyone's like, oh my God, how do we use AI? What can we do with it? But the reality is that AI has been around in our day-to-day lives in one capacity or another for a long time. So it's more about, I think, exploring where AI already is in your organization. I think the likelihood that there is no AI in your organization is low, even for the more traditional orgs, right? Like, even if you're thinking about a retailer that doesn't have an online presence, like a very, very traditional one, like I'd be willing to bet a couple bucks that their, inventory tools probably use some form of AI to predict, what they need over the holidays, for example. So like it's not this sort of like completely novel conversation for many, but for a lot of people, it's more of like oh my God, I never realized that A, B, and C, right? Like recruitment tools that are commonly use some types of AIs because you're getting thousands of resumes and you got to comb through them. And surprise, surprise, your talent team of 3 is not manually reading all those thousands of resumes. So I think for a lot of people, it's more of an effort of becoming familiar with what the concern might be, what the concerns or challenges might be, because they haven't had to apply themselves in that capacity before. But my expectation would be that, at the very least, if you use like an email client and it predicts the next word on the email that you're writing, like that's AI. So
I
Well,
mean, even if you use a
definitely.
tea kettle and it's managing the temperature, that's sort of AI, right? So to your point, there's just a lot of it going on.
it's just everywhere. So it's a question of like figuring out where it is, figuring out which ones should be worried about. Like, I don't know that we need to be worried about the tea kettle in the common kitchen. But by the way, and this is like, one of the funny things about some of these tools is like, what if some foreign adversary breached into the systems of all the tea kettles and made them explode as some sort of like crazy attack? I feel like this is going to show up in the next Fast and Furious movie. But like, I mean, like that is like an actual thing. Like, are there precautions that you should take when there's an automated system, even when it comes to a tea kettle? Like, should we unplug it every night before we leave, just in case, so that if it goes crazy, it doesn't explode in the office in the middle of the night? I don't know. Maybe that's a thing that you need to think through, but I don't know that it's a super high priority for an organization. I'd be more concerned about, once you figure out where the AI is, you rank it in terms of risk, and you're like, okay, well, we're using it in HR, payroll, and something else. Like, those are the areas that I probably need to worry about. And if you develop it, then obviously, if you're selling it in some capacity on an enterprise level or making it available to consumers, of course, that's also an area of concern. But like, even for organizations that don't do that, I would go and start with an assessment of your HR and finance departments, because chances are that there is some AI here and there, and you might want to think through, are we using it correctly? Maybe you are. A lot of these organizations that sell these products have to comply with pretty strict laws, so they have to think through those things, and hopefully they're doing it for you so that you as the user, you're not saddled with the responsibility of making sure that everything is correctly working. But at the same time, we all know that, you know, no matter how good of a product you build, like user interaction and how the product is used matters. So
Absolutely. Noelle, thinking about running the risk flag up the pole there, just from a standpoint of risk, one of the things that encourages me with everything that we've done in compliance and privacy and data privacy over the years is everybody is actively thinking about the risk here, which is a good thing. So what about what is the current regulatory landscape? What does it look like, and where do you see that heading towards for AI?
Yeah, so I think in the pipeline, honestly, it's very vast. You know, if you look at just the US, there's 23 states that have bills in some stage or another around all kinds of topics around health, generative AI, general purpose AI use. Like, so there's a lot coming out of, you know, the states, and even at the federal level, you have a number of bills that are also out there around, you know, algorithmic fairness and AI labeling, things like that. And then, of course, out of the EU, you have the EU AI Act, which is expected to be formally approved, I think, this summer. And so there's a lot of AI legislation coming. However, there's none that's quite arrived yet. But what I know, at least from the US perspective, is the, you know, Federal Trade Commission has said, we will use the tools that we currently have. So we're not going to wait for more legislation to enforce. We already will. And like they even posted a blog post about 2 weeks ago that said, you know, if you've silently or quietly updated your terms of service or privacy notice so that you can use that data now to train your models, that may be you know, deceptive practice. So you know, that's sort of the landscape.
The other interesting thing, though, is that even though there's a lot of AI regulation that is in the works, there's existing laws that affect AI. You know, privacy laws like GDPR, CCPA, they have language around automated decision making, and automated decision making is what AI does. So I think, again, if you've been in the market for a while and if you operate in that realm, I don't think that some of the things that are coming out of these legislations that are currently in the works is going to be entirely novel. Like some of the language that we're seeing in the AI Act and the risk assessments, like that's stuff that you should have been thinking about before. If you're using personal data in your AI systems. If you're not, maybe it is completely new to you, but it's certainly, I think the EU tends to be trend setting, but not super creative. A lot of their laws and processes kind of like, you know, why break something that's working? You know, the privacy impact assessments are a functioning aspect of a successful privacy program. And from their perspective, it's like, okay, well, let's adapt these to AI. It's really not that big of a leap. So I think we definitely, I think I spend a lot of time sort of like cooling anxiety sometimes with some of these new laws, because I'm like, yeah, they're new, but they're not like groundbreaking.
I think that that's a really good point. I think ultimately, regardless of the technology, right, you have to look at what information is coming in, whose information it is, what your organization is doing with it, and then what's happening to the output. And that's really what I think, Beatrice, you were getting at, which is that kind of irrespective of AI, that's been the case. If companies are doing things with humans, you still have to look at, like, you know, the sausage making, so to speak, right? What is being taken, what is happening to it, and what is the output of that information? And I think looking at the AI Act, I think you're right that they've been kind of thoughtful in Europe about making sure that it fits nicely as a puzzle piece with GDPR. You know, fun fact, today I saw IAPP posted that the vote actually was moved from April to March, the plenary vote on the EU AI Act. So I think they are trying to get that moving as fast as they can, which is interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, like most like regulations, usually they have 2 years from publishing, like once it is approved, to enactment and enforcement. So you know, with the pace that technology evolves at,
Yeah.
it's a risky business to say, this law that is designed for AI as we know it today is really only going to be enforceable in 2 years. Like, where is AI going to be in 2 years? Like flying cars? I don't know,
Could be
maybe.
Terminator 2. You never know. That's
Right,
the
that's it. It's one of my favorite movies. Luckily, if there's some sort of apocalypse, I'll probably be the first one to go because I'm so not outdoorsy and I'm not good at survival. So I don't worry about it that much because I'm not gonna have to live through the hardship.
Luckily, I already kind of live in the woods, so at least I'll get an extra day out of that.
But, going back to GDPR really quickly, the automated decision making, that is absolutely a great example of AI and a great example to be talking about. I mean, something that on my team that we talk about with clients, right? If you went through this, if you went through GDPR and you looked at the tools that you're using and how you're making decisions, if that is involved, you already are using AI. Another point just to throw in here, and then I want to move on to our next poll question, is that it's a little bit like the Wild West, right? Organizations I know have pockets all over the place where this team might be trying AI for this, or they might be using AI for this, or what about this, or what about this? So for me, thinking about it from a compliance and governance perspective towards the future, understanding what tools you approve to be used in your organization, having policies about making sure that that goes through an approval process, right? And then also understanding what are you allowing to feed data into things. I think those three areas are cornerstone for whatever's going to build, and come next.
Some
I
of the
want
things
to,
that just
go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, Ben. One
no,
more
no.
comment on that. I think that just to give some folks some illustrative examples of like where AI and machine learning, which is sort of a term that some people use interchangeably, was already coming into place a few years back. Alexa and Microsoft's Cortana were voice models that were being trained, right? And there was some criticism about, some of the training methods. If you're using a tool like Zoom and you have background blur, like guess what? That was using machine learning to make your background blur custom to you. Like a lot of these things are already happening, and I think it's critical to remember that it is really more about the input, processing, and output. But anyways, that's it. Sorry, let's move on.
No, that was a great point, though. I never even thought about that. But yeah, I want to go ahead and let's move on to our next poll. So for our second poll question, and we're going to segue into a discussion on this topic too, is who owns responsibility for AI governance? Important topic. Single choice. So while there's probably more than one involved, who would you think ultimately has responsibility? Just give a couple of seconds here for everybody to fill something out. An AI department.
This doesn't list my department, janitorial services. Literally every time there's something, then someone's like, has anyone heard of this law? The adage is like, well, Beatrice probably knows about it. Because I don't.
I think I've also seen within some organizations, like there may not be anybody who owns it just yet, right? Maybe
Right.
up to the taking.
Well, and that's why the Wild West, that's why I think of it as a little bit of a Wild West, right? Because you could have all sorts of areas involved. Everybody may not even know. Yeah. Let's see what our results are here. Go ahead, Beatrice. Yeah.
At times you'll see like certain departments wanting to be involved in the topic, but they don't want the responsibility part. They want the glory part.
That's a great point. Well, and especially because AI is a sexy topic, so to speak, right? It's the hot topic too. So, all right, let's see what we have. Privacy, I don't think that's a big surprise. I am surprised that legal overall was not higher on this list. AI department and then other. I do not know what an other would be here, but I would
Security,
say,
TRC, like
yeah.
as a CIO org.
I know some companies that lodge their AI efforts entirely under engineering, which of course creates conflicts of interest, but you know. But I'm glad to see that my department, privacy, also known as janitorial services, it's winning.
There's, I mean, part of the issue I think is that like, and I've talked about this, I think, in other webinars, is that with the exception of some upper echelon companies, most people don't have a like data council, right? It's not really even a concept. And so when something like AI comes up that is sort of this intersect between your IP council, your privacy council, your security council, if you have those things, depending on your size, yeah, there's sort of like a, where's this go, right? And you know, maybe you have a privacy department, maybe it's embedded within legal. There's so many nuances that I think it's a bit hot potato. At Go-To, I think we tried to solve that a little bit by having sort of GC, IP Council, Privacy Council working in tandem as sort of one uniform blob, so that we could like at all times be kind of checking that we were considering all the data points. And I think that worked really well with respect to kind of a privacy and legal function. Obviously, you need others outside of that, but I do think that sometimes as Privacy Council or even security folks, like we're not necessarily thinking about the IP issues because it's not necessarily where some of us were formally trained. So there's definitely other folks that like should be consulted if you have those in-house or externally.
Absolutely. I want to throw a question out to all three of you, and this kind of touches on what I mentioned about policies, processes, etc. What are some of the privacy principles or things that we all know that we do every day in our job as privacy professionals, and program development principles as well? What are some of those top things that we already do or are doing as professionals that you think can be leveraged into AI governance? Any thoughts? I'd like to go to each of you, whoever wants to volunteer to go first.
Yeah, I'll go first. So I mean, I think there's kind of a number of things, right? If you look at just even impact assessments, right? That's certainly something that's going to be critical in developing products. You know, even the concept of privacy by design, you know, embedding that in your, as you're developing your AI usage. But also even things like just notice transparency, right? We're already having to talk about the things we do with data. You know, I think AI can sometimes be seen as a black box because you know, there's sort of more of an explainability principle where you have to talk about how it was designed and how it's being used and those things. So, but you can leverage some of those. And certainly the rights category, right? Individual rights, especially if you're, depending on what you're doing with personal data specifically, you have to think about how can you maintain those rights. But I think some of the work that companies have done around that can be leveraged.
Once again, GDPR, right? It is a great, I think, foundation for building on some of these things. Val, what about
I'm gonna switch it around a little bit. I know we've talked a lot about kind of development of AI systems. I think one place where companies sometimes aren't focused enough, and there's a Gartner stat out there about double digits around this, is how employees at your own organization are actually putting sensitive or confidential data or personal data into a generative AI tool. And so one of the things I think is a critical, as somebody who's had a pretty extensive security background as well at Go-To and other places, is acceptable use policy, right? Like your acceptable use policy is a cornerstone of controlling kind of what your staffers are doing with AI kind of for the organization. I want to talk about this a little because I think Noelle and Beatrice have done a great job kind of focusing on what you do when you're developing systems and using them. But there's the other part of the coin, which is like companies have, the recipe to Coca-Cola or to Campbell's soup, right? And that's also got to be protected, or customer lists or whatever. And so being super careful, making sure your acceptable use policies, making sure there's sort of separation of personal and professional, et cetera, is super important as well. And then again, taking a page out of CCPA, CPRA, GDPR, look at the agreements, right? Just as you would pre kind of ChatGPT and all the others, like you would look at, okay, what is a certain vendor using my data for? What rights do they have? What limits do they have? Same question when you use AI as a company. right? Are you allowing them to train their model with the data? What happens to the data? Are there any rights, right? There's this huge open question around, what is a data subject access request when it comes to information in like an LLM, so looking at kind of the things that you're already doing, but I think a little like Beatrice was nodding to with the EU AI Act, making sure that you're also like thinking about the fact that while these things exist, people may need the different words and terms and phrases and kind of keyword indicators to start thinking about those particular points. But those are some of the things that I've thought about a lot, right? Like, do your terms support use of internally or externally AI? Do your service provider agreements or sub-processing agreements or whatever you call them, depending on where you are, restrict training of model data, et cetera? Do your acceptable use policies protect your company and you and your organization and your clients' data and your end users and everybody else against unlawful processing or intellectual property issues, et cetera?
Great points. All of those really great points. I hadn't even thought about the vendor part of it, but absolutely. Beatrice, did you want to add anything to all that?
The way we went about it, all that long time ago when it happened, that we decided to put in policies, we sort of went through because I had just started here, we went through a process of like which policies are we putting in place that maybe are not, they exist, but they're not written. Because that's the other thing, like sometimes you have policies and processes that are pretty good and they're pretty well established, but they're just not memorialized, and you need to do that. We started with data governance, and then from data governance, we spurred, privacy and AI, and open source. So all those three got developed consistently, to sort of reference each other. Obviously, yes, we covered things like in our acceptable use policy, there's information about AI, but the other thing that's really important is sort of figuring out like what parameters are you putting around AI usage, whether it's vendors, open source models, open source systems, open source data sets. And then how do you actually govern them? Like, I think it's one thing that I always tell my teams that I think is kind of funny, but I don't know why it doesn't come up more often, is you never want a policy if you don't have a way to enforce it and monitor it. Like if you have a policy and you can't actually prove that you're following it, to me, that's like nightmare scenario. So it's almost like it has to be like a concerned effort of like, okay, we're saying that you can't use AIs other than the ones that are approved by the company, right? Cool. How do I block people from doing it? Because you've got like thousands of employees or hundreds of employees, and like, how are we monitoring their activities on their computer? To what degree are we able to do it? And I remember when ChatGPT exploded, I was immediately like, do not allow anyone to use it. This is going to turn into a nightmare. And, sure as day, a couple months later, we started hearing about companies whose engineers had put their code into ChatGPT and had caused several incidents in a matter of hours because the code was faulty. So of course I was extremely popular with the engineering team when I decided to block ChatGPT. They were so excited about me working here. But of course, like we were just monitoring at that point, and we realized that some people weren't listening. So we set up a system whereby if you try to open ChatGPT on your corporate laptop, it crashes your computer, which again makes me so popular with everyone here. But it works. People stop trying. So I think you also need to think sort of through like, okay, here's your policies, here are your processes and your controls. Because if you just write the policies and you're not actually making efforts to make sure that they're being properly enforced and there's someone responsible for like who's doing it, because usually it's IT, right? So they're going to have to be party to those decisions, because what if you come up with a policy that totally makes sense, but lo and behold, IT has no way of actually making it happen. So that's a conversation that unfortunately you have to have often, because there will be limitations to what you can actually implement. And a lot of the time, those limitations really suck. Like you're like, okay, well, actually, I would be comfortable with A, but the only thing that we can reasonably implement is B, and B is a lot stricter. So, okay, we're going to implement B, which is not ideal. Here's like our goal for how we're going to get to a better place. We can get to A if we get this additional support, if we get these resources, if we have this amount of time. And sometimes you just got to figure that out, because the alternative can't be that you just don't monitor and you don't control.
That point is
Absolutely.
really resonant in general for all privacy program management, right? Which is that privacy pros should not be writing, in my opinion, any policy in a vacuum, right? Like working closely in tandem with engineering and product leaders and others in IT, et cetera, to kind of discuss feasibility and to make sure that the requirements can be met, and the way that they're worded and the way that things are positioned actually is sort of speaks their language, is positioned, et cetera, is critical. And I love that point, Beatrice, and I think it really applies to like everything. Deletion policies, export policies, all of the privacy controls that we all need to, manage.
So I want to, that was a lot of great feedback and input. Thank you there. Yeah, I was going to say we're going to move on next to talk about something new. I don't have a drum roll, please, but our responsible AI certification. So I'm going to give this to Noelle to talk for a few minutes about this. And like I said, something exciting and brand new from TrustArc.
Yeah, so sort of as we discussed here, AI is, the privacy department certainly has a role, whether it's your data governance team or legal or these others. There's certainly a role for the privacy folks, and we can leverage, the things that we've done. So we've created what we're calling the Responsible AI Certification. Next slide, please. Really in response to growing concerns about the risks of AI. And as practitioners who already work with data and data governance, I think we're in a good position to really help transform or give input into that landscape within our organizations. And so next slide, please. We've created a responsible AI certification looking at the sort of regulatory landscape, right? And this absence of any finalized legislation. And frankly, to Beatrice's point, where even when it is in place, who knows where AI will be at that point. But what does exist are a number of industry standards, which I think is really good for our industry, because it allows companies now to start adhering to a framework, so that when these regulations do come out, you're in a better position figuring out which ones are applying to you based on what you're doing or your market or your jurisdiction. You already sort of have something in place. And so what we've done is we've created the Responsible AI Certification that incorporates a number of these core principles from different frameworks, from NIST, from the OECD AI principles. We've looked at draft regulations, really to create that baseline for organizations. Next slide, please. And some of the benefits of certification, really, I think of sort of three different benefits. One, there is making sure you have AI governance in place. And if you have not already, say, chosen a framework, this sort of takes the core principles of all those that we've looked at, so that there is something to adhere to, and you can put that in place. Second is it creates this culture of responsible AI within an organization, which we've also touched on, right? Is that, aside from the products and services we have, like employees also want to use it. We want to use it in operations in all these different ways. But as we know, in janitorial services, right, you sometimes have to, limit what people are doing in order to not create greater risks for the organization. And finally, the benefits of certification is, I know companies are getting questions, whether it's from other organizations in the vendor management process about how you're using AI, what data is going into it, what's the design, And so certification to the Responsible AI framework allows you to demonstrate externally. You've had an independent third party review your practices, review your AI governance. So you can say, look, here's what we've put in place, and we can answer those questions. We're confident about our use in AI.
Beatrice? So do you see a certification like this? Yeah, do you see a certification like this helping with problems or what you're seeing today, or the status quo that you're dealing with already?
I think the biggest challenge that most organizations have is even though you put in place all of the right policies and all the right controls, it always is difficult to convey information to especially clients or consumers. I find certifications to be especially beneficial when you're in the enterprise business, because those are the scenarios where you're most likely to encounter extensive assessments in order to win a client, or in order to maintain that business relationship over time. This is very common in the privacy and security world, but we've seen those questionnaires expand over the last 6 months, I would say, to include some high-level AI questions, including, do you use AI in your systems? Which I always find to be a hilarious question, because the business people will always say yes, because that's how you get your foot in the door, and like everyone else is like, slow down. It's not really AI. So I do think that having a third-party certification, something you can sort of point to that says, okay, look, someone that, you know, we pay for the certification, but who has no vested interest in our success, is telling you that we went through certain assessments and we verified that what we do is valid based on prevalent standards, you know, whether those are applicable laws or emerging frameworks. I think it's extremely valuable. I think it can be valuable in the direct-to-consumer business as well, depending on the type of direct-to-consumer products that you might develop and how sophisticated your users might be, right? If you're developing products whose users are engineers, it's going to be a lot more valuable than, you know, some app that you track your steps with, right? Like, I don't know that the average user of a fitness app is going to have as much of an interest in your AI certification. But I think that is one sort of like bucket of value. If you're publicly traded or PE owned, it'll have a lot of value, in my opinion, when it comes to your board and how you present your you know, your approach to AI. And then I think the last aspect of it is probably focused on potential regulatory implications. We don't know what those will look like yet, because these laws are still new and we don't know where they're going, but it's safe to assume that Europe will have some obnoxious percentage of potential fines based on your total annual revenue, and then it'll become unclear if it's just a subsidiary or your overall parent company, and it'll be a fun time for all the lawyers. But in those scenarios, obviously, one thing that we'll see carried over, and we've already seen in the drafts, is accountability will remain an important aspect of AI regulations, just like it's an important aspect of privacy regulations. And having external audits is not gonna, you know, be the end all be all. And a regulator still want to, probably, I assume, still going to want to see the substance. But it's always nice to be able to say, look, not only did I do A, B, and C, but I also verified it with someone else who told me I wasn't crazy. Because I think the other interesting thing is, as an emerging business, but we've seen with privacy, which has been around for much longer, a lot of companies still have just the one privacy professional, right? So having this external validation of what you're doing can also help you validate internally and externally the decisions that are being made and how you're approaching compliance. So it's not going to be a guarantee. Nothing's ever 100%. It's not going to solve every problem you have. It might not solve most of the problems you have, but it will sort of provide you with something more to pin your hopes onto about whether or not you're doing right by the law, your users, your clients, customers, even your employees. Because I mean, a lot of AI, as we saw before, the participants in the poll mentioned that a lot of the AI that they use is on the operational side. So that affects your employees. Being able to show to your employees that you're taking AI seriously, not just, you know, as it impacts the so-called and infamous bottom line, but also as it impacts them as individuals, I think that's meaningful.
What about in the digital advertising space, right? We talk a lot about all of that. And what do you think about the certification for being in the digital advertising space and how that might actually help as well? There's a lot of scrutiny around digital advertising space, you know, these days.
I always joke about how the ad tech industry is the most regulated, non-regulated industry on the planet. Because
That's great.
There are no specific laws that apply to ad tech, but there are so many tangentially relevant laws. So that's a very interesting space to be in. And it's always a learning experience. Like every day there's a new acronym. So that's great. I think, again, we operate in the enterprise space, so we work with large brands. And for Double Verify, it's incredibly valuable to have the ability to at least provide, I'm going to sound so lawyerly now. Look at Val's face, everyone. He'll like squirm at this. It's important to provide prima facie evidence that you've been doing a good job. Noelle's also like, oh my gosh, she's insufferable. So prima facie evidence, meaning, some sort of like initial evidence that you've been doing some work, right? And TrustArc is a well-established company in the space, and has been providing verification and I don't know if you guys refer to yourselves as auditing services, but verification and certification services for a while, focused on privacy. And we've been doing a lot of them. I used to do that in my old job, and I carried them over to this job. And again, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, you know what? Ever since I did one audit, suddenly my business has grown by 40%. Like that'd be amazing, but that's not what happens. But what I always tell my team when I ask them to commit time, because like we always think about doing these verifications is like, oh, it's going to cost us X amount of money, right? Like that's negligible to me. The thing that's always most important is how much time will my teams have to devolve to get this done, and which departments are going to have to participate, because I'm going to have to sell it to them. It's not just me selling to finance why we need to pay for this. It's also like engineering, please help. IT, please help. Security, please help. Like they're not getting any real benefit from this. They're just helping me out. So I need to go and show them why this is valuable, right? And what I always tell them is, if out of 10 clients, one of them doesn't send, it's the same argument that we have for SOC 2, the same argument that we have for having a SIG. If out of 10 clients, one of them doesn't send you a 400 question questionnaire, that's worth it. If out of 10 clients, one of them doesn't want to get on a call to talk about how you develop AI, to me, that's worth it. Like it's one less call that I have to do, one less thing that I have to worry about. And that's where you got to start, right? Like I'm always very like non-aspirational with this stuff. And I'm just like 10% less work throughout the year is worth putting in the effort to do this.
And I think about that in a sort of slightly different but similar way, which is even if it's not 10%, even if it's one prospect is looking at 3 competitors and one has the trustee seal and 2 don't, right? The incremental aggregate effect adds up, right? One questionnaire here, one less AI addendum there. Like those things do add up over time, and they have measurable effects. Which was sort of my pitch, by the way, at GoTo for the enterprise privacy cert, which was like, look, people keep asking why we don't have a third-party privacy certification. This is the answer in RFPs, in negotiations. And I think similarly with the AI cert, like this shows a reputable third party came in, looked at your stuff, helped you verify, helped you get in line. And also, frankly, kind of as a fringe benefit, Beatrice, you mentioned regulators, like it helps you build that muscle around demonstrating evidence. When a customer asks, it won't be your first time answering it now.
I think it's also like I completely agree with you with the competitor. I think the reason why I was being very quote unquote pitchy, sort of telling everyone here like how do I go in pitching it? What I find with the questionnaires, for example, with the privacy assessments, is that is very easily quantifiable. Like we've been able to quantify over the years how questionnaires have expanded, what percentage, because obviously, hopefully you're getting more and more clients, so you're getting more questionnaires, period. But how is that proportionally growing between like how many clients you're getting versus how many questionnaires you're getting? That to us is very quantifiable. I agree with you on the competitive aspect, and I do hope that it has a positive impact. I find it harder to quantify sometimes because we don't, I don't know how often other people do like postmortems when you lose a bid, but it might not. Like, I don't know that I've ever heard anyone tell me, oh, we didn't go with that vendor because they didn't have a specific certification. The only time that I've ever heard that has been with SOC 2s because they've become so prevalent. But there's time for that, right? Like privacy is still emerging. We're 20 to 25 years behind security. So if you start doing the certifications now, down the line, when they will become like SOC 2, where they will become sort of the lay of the land, you'll already have them. You'll already have the experience. You'll be, you know, a step above everyone else. So that to me is also a very persuasive argument. I do always try to target the quantifiable ones first that I can show hard data for. But if I get hard data about something like that, I definitely pursue it.
And if I had
Cool.
a drum roll, this would be another drum roll.
NymityAI. All right. So,
NymityAI, yeah.
just in case anybody's not familiar, Nymity is TrustArc's research platform. It has decades of, decades and tens of thousands of pieces of content that were created by in-house, privacy professionals, attorneys, researchers, subject matter experts, etc. When I joined, one of the things that we were looking at closely was how do we make NymityAI more beneficial for kind of people throughout their journey in privacy, particularly as I think a lot of people in our space, and you've probably had this conversation at some point, if you started kind of pre-GDPR or even earlier than that, there were times in our careers in privacy where you could really, read the book, focus, pontificate, drink a tiny espresso, think about it, laugh, whatever. But post CCPA, CPRA, Sephora, LGPD, every other acronym, that's really not the world we live in anymore, right? Most of us, even if we want to dig deep, we are either pulled in 20 directions, or we're distracted, or we're janitorial services, like Beatrice said, right? Really, really poignant. So that's why I think NymityAI is so exciting. NymityAI really does two things, and I'm going to go through a few slides, but I'm going to also like stop and do a demo. I am not in solutions consulting, so if I am not really good at this, that's why. When I show you the demo, but I want to show you why NymityAI I think will be a game changer for folks. Just to go through the slides quickly, what is it? It is a tool that will be available both within the research platform Nymity that we provide, but also for subscribers who have Nymity, they can use it across the TrustArc platform. It will help you save time, work smarter, and reduce costs. Why? Because now, in wherever you are, whether you're within the research platform or you're making a ROPA or fulfilling a data subject access request or managing your cookie consent, depending on what you subscribe to, and you have a question, you don't need to leave where you are. You don't need to open a new tab. You don't need to call Beatrice, although I might still call her with questions, right? But you could just look in NymityAI, at least to get you started, which is super exciting. And by the way, like to date myself a little, in 2017, I probably called Baker McKenzie 300 times because I was like, what is a controller again? What is a processor again? And you might still need to do that, by the way. But at least with NymityAI, you will get your jump off running blocks, right? You can get a preliminary answer, so you are more informed before you go and you need to phone a friend or get a subject matter expert in it. Additionally, it can be super helpful when Beatrice mentioned this earlier. This might have been during the practice, but a lot of us are sort of in these funny situations where you're doing your work, you're going about your day, and somebody pings you about something you've never heard before, right? Like the other day, somebody was asking me about a Vietnamese data protection law. And, I looked at NymityAI because I didn't have
You're not an expert of Vietnamese data protection law?
My wife and I did spend our honeymoon in Vietnam, which was amazing, but no, they didn't teach me.
No, I would not have agreed to do this webinar.
I know. When I was in Hanoi, eating street food, they didn't tell me about data protection laws. But anyway, so NymityAI, instant answers, time saver. We will continue to build off of it, but it's got 45,000 pieces of content already, decades of experience, current information, etc. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I want to, instead of going through the slides some more, because I know we're cutting short, I want to show everybody what it looks like and why I'm jazzed about it. So give me 1 second.
Definitely did it yourself by saying jazz.
It's not the first time. All right.
I don't even know. I'm not Gen Z.
I just wished I'd had this when I was.
Oh, me too.
Yeah,
me too.
Would have made my life so much easier.
Okay, so let's just go into the TrustArc main page, right? This is a, don't go into yours and say, hey, where is this thing? This is a, behind the wall, production ready version. But let's say you go to, and it'll be ready soon for everybody else, but you go to your homepage and you see this little article in the left-hand corner, GDPR, EDPB clarifies the notion of a controller, right? And again, you don't necessarily want to go asking people what a controller is, because it's a little embarrassing. You don't know. Maybe you just moved from litigation, which I know we all know people who've done that, or maybe you are a brand new attorney or a brand new person in the field or whatever, or you forgot because you're focused on another jurisdiction. You can now open up NymityAI, which is available in a modal, right? There's a little button up here and it pops up in a modal and you can say, what is a data controller? And it will give you an answer. And one of the things that I've struggled with, I think all of us do with generative AI, is when you ask it a question in ChatGPT or Gemini, where did it come from? Where did it go? Sorry, I won't date myself anymore. But there are references, right? Which is really cool. And again, this is sort of still being worked on, but for example, it gives you, some Dutch DPA guidance around processors and controllers. So you now know that it's not just something that Gemini or ChatGPT just came up with from a blog from Joe's privacy house, right? This is Nimity content that was drafted by Nimity professionals that is now available to you through kind of this easy to access methodology. So super excited about that. I'm now going to jump into another thing. Let's say you're not a Nimity client, like I said, but you do have Data Inventory Hub, right? Everybody's got to make records of processing, data mapping, et cetera. And you go here. By the way, this is all dummy data. You go here and you've never done one before, and you're looking at this thing and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? How do I even get started? By the way, I'm 100% sure everybody on this call has literally been there. What do I do to get started on a data inventory? What even is a data inventory? What's a ROPA, right? So now you can actually summon NymityAI in your data inventory tool and say, what do I need to put in it, right? Or what are the rules in X country or state? And it'll give you answers to that stuff, which is really exciting. I think that this is something that should help people kind of across their career. If you're just getting started, you can ask, what is a data inventory? If you're a pro and somebody's telling you about CCPA and CPRA, and you want to know what cross-contextual behavioral advertising is, you can ask more sophisticated questions, right? It can kind of follow you along your journey. The way that I've referred to this internally, and I keep doing it, is sort of, we've Harry Pottered it, which is like the Harry Potter books, where you read the first one, and it's kind of geared towards kids and a more light and and happy, versus the later books, which are sort of for older kids, a little darker, a little more violent, whatever. Privacy does not get dark and violent, hopefully, but except for Terminator 2. But people's requirements and needs really change. And NymityAI can kind of help people who are saying, what is GDPR, all the way through to, what does it mean? What are the risks of rights and freedoms to individuals? What does that mean? Right? And so on and so on. So NymityAI is really designed to kind of do both. And why I think it's the biggest game changer is that you can do it not just in Nimity, but in the rest of the tool. Being able to invoke this thing in your privacy tech while you're fulfilling an access request or making an inventory or whatever to ask questions, I think will really help people find speed, scale, and savings, which is what everybody's kind of looking for these days.
I just want to point out that I did not have Val comparing privacy to Harry Potter on my bingo card for 2024, but I am glad I heard it.
Yeah, and it's only February and you were already able to take care of that, right? Well, we're at the end of our hour. I just wanted to say thank you to all three of you for joining, and to everybody who joined us today. We will be sending out the recording links after this, and as well, just keep an eye on the TrustArc website for more on this. We actually do have other content about AI and what's coming and such. And we should mention, when is the certification officially launching? And quick, when is NymityAI officially launching, so everybody knows?
March 27th, both.
Yeah. So coming a little less than a month. There you go. And lastly, Val, you got a compliment on your jazz hands during your presentation there. So I just wanted to let you know, someone said you were very enthusiastic. So it was great.
Yes, the top of my hands.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.